Good afternoon. Welcome to How to Talk to your admins and architects about DevOps. My name is Ron Scott Adams. I'm with the VMware Storage and Availability Business Unit. And DevOps is definitely something near and dear to our hearts. Everything from vSAN to SRM and all of this is being continuously designed and considered in light of the DevOps culture, the DevOps movement, while meeting up with that virtual infrastructure, that more traditional mindset, and helping them understand what's the point of this revolution and where is that going. I want to kind of set the stage with two quotes that I picked up and kind of carried with me because I think they really identify where is that mismatch, where is that disconnect. So first one is from a sysadmin I talked to last year. Said, I don't really know what containers are, honestly. All I know is I've got these big ass VMs, I can't vMotion anywhere, and I don't know what to do with them. That's his life with containers. A few years before that, I had talked to a really excited developer who had just come fresh from the Docker table. He's talking about how containers are a big deal. I don't know if these VM admins realize, but they're going to be out of a job in 2 to 3 years. What do I need a VM admin for? Is DevOps a threat? So all these terms, DevOps, hyperconverged, NFV, SDDC, cloud, let's throw them all out there at once. They're supposed to be about bringing IT together, not about tearing it apart. If you don't know what he's saying, tap the guy next to you, he probably does. There's a natural and clear need for the DevOps, the SysOps, the network admin, all these architects. It's clear they should be working together. And that's actually what the movement, that's what the environment is ultimately about. As we start to scale this beyond developer needs to take one application out to production to let's make this a way of life, let's make it viable, that's the real root. I think there's also sometimes this view that the silos, the separated ideas and the separated structures and teams that exist in IT are this thing that came out of like this hyper-organized, cyborg mind-like order. And what I usually find from my own experience as a former customer, from talking to other customers, from talking to people who have had different experiences themselves, these usually came out much more chaotically. And it was a little bit more like, oh, you figured that out? You made it work? That's yours now. Anybody have like that thing that they figured out and now it's theirs? And maybe wish they weren't? Yeah, I was there too. That's what happens when you say, oh, I've done that before. Now you're the person who does the thing. Been there, done that. I like the term DevOps, but I also like to turn it around sometimes and talk about the op dev. There's two sides to this. As we get more and more about full stack and we stop talking about, well, I built it on my laptop, launched it into EC2, I built it on my laptop and launched it into a VCPP cloud, and I'm good to go. Now we talk about, well, I'm going to take the DevOps mentality to my premises environment, so I'm going to take the DevOps mentality to my hybrid cloud. You need more of that union. People coming from one end, from the developer end, and coming towards that operator, and people coming from the operations and architecture end and coming towards that developer. There's a lot of knowledge on each side, and that collaboration can really make it work. Every systems team member, someone who is a systems operator, systems administrator, systems architect, anyone have roles like that? That's your kind of thing, you're a VI admin or something like that. Maybe you have the developer background too, but that's where you are. If you're not doing it, you need to start a full stack journey. So once upon a time, I was a systems architect for a Fortune 500 financial company, and one of my responsibilities was training some of the new admins and ops teams who would come in. And I told them that the first thing you need to start doing besides your day-to-day and all the stuff that you'll be told by your boss to manage and run, you need to learn a scripting or programming language and start it by learning how to do really stupid stuff. It doesn't matter how applicable it is to your job. You need to start it, and not with the idea of you're going to master that programming language, because you may never, and that's okay. You need to start a full stack journey. Understand how applications work, what makes code run. And vice versa, of course, for developers, what makes systems run. Systems architects, people who are putting these systems together and designing, can get excited about this union of bringing DevOps to the systems teams, because now you're talking about a data center that's run by end-to-end owners. My focus might be storage or networking because that's my systems expertise. But because I've taken the time to understand the developer side, I now have an ownership feeling over end to end. I understand, oh, this is the code actually flowing through my network. And that's definitely been a story that's getting better as of late because of better tools, because of better culture, and because of, frankly, just the need of the way applications are sprawling nowadays. The first step is understanding DevOps people. There's a lot of terms, there's a lot of wizardry, there's a lot of processes to get through, but systems teams need to be able to understand DevOps people. Is anyone somewhere like at an organization where you feel like developers are in this corner and systems teams are in this corner and you kind of wave hi to each other? And you do that like lip-only smile thing in the hallway and that's about your connection point? It's got to get closer. And it is totally a two-way street. And I've talked to, in my time at VMware and elsewhere, I've talked to development teams that said we would love to talk to our systems teams, but they won't let us. And I've talked at the same company to the systems teams and say, oh yeah, sure, we talk to our developers, but they never want to talk to us. How does it happen? So I think one first thing that needs to happen is just talk. Talk about some things going on, get a connection point. Lunch and learns are great. Go to the boss, or if you are the boss, check the budget, set aside some, get a lunch in, do a little lunch and learn on one thing. And then have them host, and then have them come in and say, we're going to host a lunch and learn. We'll feed you lunch. Teach us something. Anything. It gets the conversation going. Or my personal favorite, if not a lunch and learn, how about a drink and think? So, company policy prohibiting. Listen, because they're going to talk about challenges, and I will tell you that when I've seen these conversations start, and when I've started these conversations myself within organizations where I've worked, the first conversations can be a little choppy, and you hear the usual complaining like, you developers just want to spawn out a bunch of apps, you just want to throw stuff out, and it's just overwhelming us. You're like, yeah, okay, I've heard this before, we can talk about whatever. But listen a little closer, because there's another layer of challenge in there that you stand a chance of missing. And for sure, it might feel like a little bit of one way, you're kind of getting yelled at almost, feeling at first. But find those deeper level challenges and start talking to those. It'll make for a lot more productive of a talk. And finally, engage. And engage means a lot of things, but it's really about geeking out together. I've talked to developers who've never touched systems in their life, so to speak. They've just kind of they're just starting themselves on that DevOps journey. And they're not really systems people, but if I break down like what the system is doing and I say, well, okay, as architect, I have to design this and figure out this flow. And yeah, sure, it's metal and not code like you're dealing with, but it goes from here to here, but I have to figure out why does every time we have this application set up go this way, why can't we have a shorter path? And they're like, this is like code efficiency. This is like optimization. And they actually start to geek out over it. Systems teams will do the same thing if you understand and explain things as far as one engineer to another, one architect to another. A lot of times it's just not that opportunity and it's not built into the project you're working on. Sometimes it's not built into that focus. Go from the to the processes. The processes are there because the people want to make things happen. And those processes should really be about explaining, look, we're people solving a problem and you got to solve a problem in some agreed upon way so we're going somewhere. All these Agile-like processes, and there's a billion names for them, right? There's all kinds of different Agile fads and everything. What are they really about? Get a responsive outcome instead of catching up to requirements. This is the constant developer plight, right? You build the application, the requirements change. You deliver exactly on the requirements. Oh, there's this requirement we talked to you about. I was just talking to my friend Marcus earlier about how he was doing some systems consulting. Not even really the typical what you think of as developing, but actually systems automation, and requirements changed bunches of times because the customer is just like, do it like this. This happens all the time. That was the idea of the Agile process. So get them into the idea that there's a purpose behind this process and the why. Because those requirements change. Because that fine line between cars and faster horses, and what I'm talking about is there's a quote that's attributed to Henry Ford that says, if I had given the customer what they wanted, they would have got faster horses. And when you're doing developing, when you're doing systems delivery and application delivery, and it's really all about getting the app out, every single end of that, it really is about that fine line between innovate, create something not quite what the customer was looking at, but meets their needs. the car. And then sometimes you do need to give them the faster horse. That is the most expedient thing to do. You got to find that line. That's what Agile-like processes, of course, are built around solving. Things like fail fast get you there. And also because when you own the customer's story, all that stuff we're putting in Jira, story, epic, all that stuff, and clicking the different icons, it's really about you own the customer's story, their day-to-day, and that makes a better platform because you're understanding what they're living with. Bring systems teams to that because their understanding of Agile is Scrum Master, whatever that means. Bring them to it. Systems teams have the same exact problem. Requirements changing, needs to figure out ways to fail fast, all of that. They have those same things, but it's often harder for them to be dynamic. Hardware choices when systems teams are building. So I was systems architect, and a lot of things I did resulted in a hardware purchase. Development stuff, if I deploy some development choice, and I decide, that's not right, let's kind of rethink it. That software package probably wasn't free. Maybe even some consulting went along with it that wasn't free. But the restructuring isn't too bad. Hardware, I can't say, I know we just bought this $2.5 million system, but I could do without it. That's resume generating material right there. And then on the other side of that, the vendors in the system space have not previously been so aware and been so helpful to people around reaching these rapid redesign ideas. These ideas of, I need to redesign, I need to rethink, I need to go through that fail fast, Agile-like cycle. And that's actually usually because of the above. Hardware being harder to rework. Changes being more slow, being more driven by, here's your infrastructure, deal with it. But we're seeing that change, of course. If you see it on the floor, if you go talk to any of the traditional people you think of as hardware, Dell, Pure, all these people that you think of as like, well, they put out a box and there's their box and that's their thing. You talk to all of them, they'll say, yeah, we're software companies. The box is incredibly important. That software inside and that agility is critical because we need to be able to help our customers go through basically their own kind of Agile transformation. They'll use different words, but the ideas are the same. And when you communicate these processes to the DevOps, help them understand it's the ideas that are similar there. And software is eating the world, the famous Mark Andreessen quote. I made this required reading for every sysadmin and system operator that I trained so that they could understand that is software a threat to your job? Absolutely, if you think your job is not software. If you think your job is not applications to a customer, if it's not the customer's app, and if the app works, it's a threat to your job. If you think your job is, I make sure the customer's app works, no, it's the best thing ever. Software eating the world is good for you. You've got an ally built in when you talk to systems teams as a DevOps in the VMware teams. The VMware SDDC is software-defined data center. Or as Pat has told us now, self-driving data center. It's always going to be software in my heart. So software-defined data center, that idea is actually intrinsic to that agility and all the stuff you reference in Agile processes and in DevOps processes. VMware admins right now are getting a ton of language and ideas around Agile processes. They just don't know they're Agile processes. Step outside the rigor of we follow exactly and adhere to the true Agile process. We are the one true Agile shop and all that. And get to the point of the processes and you'll find there's a lot of common ground. Now you can get into the technologies. People, processes, and technologies. Start with infrastructure as code because this is a really fast concept to glue on. It's an easy idea to translate. I tell the system to do stuff and it does stuff. Because all of them are learning this now. All the systems teams are learning this stuff now. Now when a lot of you from the DevOps side are thinking about this, you're thinking things like Ansible, Chef, SaltStack, Puppet, stuff like this. Your system teams are going to think more like PowerShell, group policy, bash scripts. Those excellently written bash script systems teams have copy-pasted from the blogs. And you think, that's not DevOps, that's not infrastructure as code. Don't get pedantic about it. Instead, think about, okay, that's how you accelerate and set up your system. This is all built on these kind of purposes. Meet in that middle and make it the technologies about the ideas. From there, what naturally happens, it gets into the discussion of the heart of DevOps, developers being operators. How many people feel like if you try to broach this in your organization, here be dragons? Might get into a little territorialism, might get into a little, developers, you don't touch the systems, we're the systems team. I've talked to companies that are smaller than all of you sitting in these chairs that could fit in this theater comfortably, and companies that couldn't fit in the whole VM village, and many of them have the same problem. We're not so sure about this DevOps thing because I don't think the developers should be operating stuff because we're the systems team. They need to understand DevOps isn't about taking them away, it's about giving them something to do that's actually relevant to the application. So remember that DevOps and Ops Dev conversation and think about it. Are you willing to help an ops get better at understanding scripting and then coding? I had a great developer for the financial company I worked for who we sat together for a few weeks and went through PowerShell scripts I was using to manage certain systems aspects throughout vSphere, throughout Microsoft, all of that. We went through them one by one and did the good old buddy coding system, but with the scripts. He taught me to think more in a code flow, more in a developer flow. And he said, okay, that works in your script, but now think about what you told it to do. You went up and down, up and down, up and down. Make it a little bit more logical. That will get them thinking along this path. It actually gets them to geek out like, oh, this is neat. Optimization is kind of cool. Likewise, are you willing to sit with the operator and learn the systems? What are all those funny graphs you're looking at? Are you just trying to hide your high score in Minesweeper, or are you actually doing something? Teach me. Have that curiosity. Geek out about it yourself because there's a lot of things you'll find. Common engineering problems. However, don't get into the which IAC stack. Well, now that we've talked about this, let's go Ansible because it's a clear answer. Too soon. Too soon. Get them hooked on the ideas, get them geeked out over the process and the technology basis. So now touch the big one, containers. I am super a believer that for systems teams, containers are not hard. They're just explained badly. Bad car analogies, well, it's really just like running in a jail shell. Don't tell that to your gray-bearded Unix admin. He will freak out and tell you how bad jail shells are at scale. Explain the concept, walk it through, and talk about it as a problem-solving exercise, because if there's one thing that those fundamentals of the early days of container orchestration and creation, companies like Docker, individual developers, all of that, all those people contributed, if there's one thing they did really well, it was, we're doing this because we're solving an actual problem happening right now. Very, very practical stuff. So you start with this kind of idea. And I put it in pretty PowerPoint. You're going to do it on sloppy whiteboard with squares and orange marker and all of that. This is very familiar. This is a VM. They get it. OS goes on top of a virtualization layer that delivers to hardware. Put an app in there. Pretty obvious. They're going to be with you so far. Duh. Apps need libraries. Tell them, you don't like DLLs? If they're Linux guys, you can just say lib, libraries. They know what those are. They get it. Put another app in. They've all done this. Systems teams, they've deployed apps on apps and apps, and they understand that some of them use the same DLLs and all of that. Now I patch app 2, and it updates the library because the updater just decided, that library's old. Old news. I need 2.4. This all makes sense to the systems team. They've lived this story just like you as developers have. So now the library's great for app 2. App 1 is broken. So let's give everybody their own library and make them all happy. That's great. That's a good concept. But what happens if those libraries share enough base or share an installer and one conquers the other? Then only one is going to win, which means only one application wins. You update the OS, it breaks the library. Now only the OS is happy and the apps aren't working and the customer's mad even though the OS is fine. It's broken everything. Again, fundamental ideas that you know and you're like, yeah, this is why we made containers. Help systems teams through this process because you're like, yes, I have this problem every day. They don't even know yet that you're telling them this is what containers are solving. There's way more problems too. You can think of your own. Think of things that have happened in your enterprise. Think of things that have occurred here. There's a lot of story to tell just in that. Both the DevOps and the systems teams suffer when this breaks. There it is. That's the container as a systems team can understand it. Just move the virtualization layer. The beginning understanding of container is just move the virtualization layer between the application and the OS. And without even finishing that picture, systems teams is going to start to click in their heads. Wait, I get it. I get it, because they know what happens when you put a virtualization layer between OS and hardware. But of course, this is going to abstract those IO requests. It's going to allow for that flexibility, and where you can talk about, hey, you remember how all the developers, how we're using Debian on our desktops, but we deploy on, the Red Hat Enterprise Linux stuff deployed, and, we suffer our hell, and everything breaks? This solves that. That's going to make sense. Help them understand that when you're protecting that portability and the integrity of the container, that it's read-only, and that stateful data is stored elsewhere. I point that out specifically because a lot of systems teams are like, okay, I get this container thing, so you put all the data inside the container. Well, yeah, but it's read-only. Where do you put application data? Because the system teams are always thinking about where stateful stuff is. So working with vSAN as intimately as I do, I can tell you, compute, while hypervisors are no easy trick, and there's a lot of interesting math in there, compute's easy. Storage is really scary. It's not just hard, it's scary because of stateful data and how scary stateful storage is and how you have to think about that. Help them understand, yes, there's stateful stuff. And I know we talk this good game, and there's this like magical story about how containers are stateless and the future of the enterprise application is stateless. As you'll hear from Cormac and Christos in their great session coming up on Kubernetes on vSAN, most containers that are deployed out there include some stateful data. They include references to it. So I want to understand, there's a link, connect those dots. Then take them out to the application container and how the apps sit in separate containers on that virtualization layer, just like multiple VMs run on a hypervisor. Now it's something understandable because they see this as hypervisor, but the virtualization layer is moved. When you take them side by side, they're both just software. This is the key thing where you can meet on, and both teams can realize a little bit more depth around it. On the left, I'm screwing around with my Docker instances, and I'm on there running and seeing what images I have, what I have running, what I can spin up. On the right, I'm screwing around in ESX top, looking at my VMs as software threads on the hypervisor. Now here's where you can meet together in the technologies. Opportunities for scale. We can now take that VMware layer, that hypervisor layer, put on top of it the OSs that are running the Docker and abstract the apps. You can have your cake and eat it too. Virtualization at both layers to provide that scale. And we've got a lot of great sessions on that, a lot of great coverage. And you saw some of the sessions, of course, here in Code Theater today, emphasizing that. And yeah, for sure, while I'm showing here one VM running one Docker instance in turn running multiple containers, they could run multiple Docker instances. Should you do it? A lot of you have been working with it now. Well, yes, no, maybe. Great time for container deep dive. This is that engage and geek out part. Now you can talk about how cool that is. When you take that out across multiple hypervisors, VMware is that orchestration layer at this virtualization layer, the lower virtualization layer. Kubernetes is at the higher one. They both do the same kind of jobs. Deployment, automation, resiliency, management, just at two different levels. Anybody remember this commercial? Okay, good. Why don't you combine those powers? This is the point of what we're doing. This is the point of Pivotal Container Service. That Kubernetes layer, that VMware layer. Now you can come together and work on a common platform. You can create those meaningful interchanges and clear roles for everyone involved in delivering enterprise apps to customers. Couple quick closing thoughts to you. Don't be dogmatic. There's more than one way to do things. Tribalism, going off in your own separate corners, will never win anything. Engage with each other. And you started down this DevOps path so that you could help yourself get to a freedom in how you design and scale your apps. Help the systems teams find that, because that freedom is definitely all that we all want. So definitely thank you for your time. Please fill out the survey thing. You get cool prizes and all that. And I really appreciate your time. Come and find me if you have any questions. Thanks.